homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. It's time for our first garden tour of the season. Forgive my appearance. I have been planting stuff all day. I did that thing that any gardener who starts their own seeds is familiar with, which is I started way too many things. And so I've spent some of the day stuffing things into beds because it's now warm enough that I don't have to worry about a frost anymore. This is going to be a bed of zinnias. And I've had a bed of zinnias here right next to my front door for the past 3 or 4 years. And it's a little bit shady. It's just on the edge of being able to pull it off, but it is really glorious. I have a little bit of a fence there that helps hold things up. I usually have to tie things up a bit. This is seed from the Floret zinnias, some of the various varieties that she had last year. A local farm grew them, and I went out and just collected handfuls of seed in the fall of last year. So they're all crossed. I have no idea exactly what I'm going to get, but it's always fun to get these beds put together a little bit. This is my columbine that blooms every year just gloriously around this aspen tree. And then I have one that for no apparent reason, because the original seed was the blue, is white. So I have this really gorgeous white columbine that is actually, it's hard to get the full effect there. Let me see if I can adjust the exposure a little bit. It's hard to get the full effect on this white one because it is so white in the camera, but it is really, really pretty. So just kind of a fun thing to see this time of year. So let's go out to my raised bed garden and see what we got going on. So if you followed me for a couple of years, you are familiar with this garden. This is my raised bed garden. I also, for the last few years, actually for the last 14 years, have had a big garden out in the front part of our property because I was selling at farmers markets and growing things for value-added products. But this year I am scaling back on all of that. And so I have actually leased my front pasture to a fellow farmer, and they are going to grow for production out there this year, and I don't have to do all of that work, which is fantastic. And so really all I have at this point, there is one other bed that I will show you guys later in the season, but mostly I just have this growing area. And so this is 7 metal 4x8 raised beds off of Amazon, and I just did a video about these because we put in a new one, and these have been in since 2022. So this is going to be the 4th growing season on these beds. And other than me doing damage by running into them with wheelbarrows and things like that, they have held up very well. We have very good soil underneath these beds, and so I didn't feel like I needed to go a whole lot higher, just because once the roots get down into the subsoil underneath the beds, that's also quite good quality. So let's see what we've got going on here. And the other thing I put in this year is we took this old stock tank that we used to have for the sheep and for the ducks, and it was starting to rust out, and we hadn't used it in the last year, and so we decided to turn this into a bed as well. And this is entirely flowers this year. It's a combination of annuals and perennials, and so I'm really hoping for big, beautiful flowers going on in here this year. I've got some sweet peas along the edge here. Then this is calendula in 2 different colors, pink bachelor button. I came into a bunch of free seeds this year, and so I'm growing a lot of things that I haven't grown before. I don't usually grow bachelor buttons. We've got some more of the zinnias that are the same as the stuff in the front yard. Some really pretty marigolds. Some of the Sahara Rudbeckia that I have grown the last couple of years that is so, so pretty. So there's 3 of those in there. This fuzzy guy is a Roman chamomile, and the Roman chamomile is supposed to be perennial. And so high hopes for that. I've grown the German chamomile off and on over the years, but it tends to reseed like crazy, and I would like something that was a little less aggressive in the reseeding, and having a perennial instead of an annual would also be nice. Behind the Rudbeckia, I've got some echinacea. There is a butterfly echinacea in there, which is a mix of colors, so I'm not sure what that's going to be. And then some cayenne echinacea that should be a red rather than a deep purple or a pink, so that should be fun. This is golden marguerite, this little guy who looks a little bit like a yarrow. And they are really good for beneficial insects. I've grown them in the past. It is a short-lived perennial, kind of tender perennial. And so yellow flowers on that. Little yellow daisy flowers, if I remember correctly. And anise hyssop, which I've grown for many years. It's great for tea. And then some true hyssop, which I've never grown before. They both have blue/purple flowers, so that will be fun. And then along the very back here, I have dianthus, which I've never grown before. And this is probably going to take 2 or 3 years before this gets fully mature. And they will probably need to be spread out a little bit. But I'm excited for those. So I would say about half of this is perennial and half of it is reseeding annual. So we'll see what we get. I'll keep you posted as we go along. This bed on the end, I have a Luna hibiscus, which is a perennial hibiscus in our climate that I had in a different spot, and we put in a new bed for tomatoes. And so that got moved to the end of this bed, and she's growing. She's doing pretty good. She's got some really nice new growth on it. So hopefully we will get some flowers off of this year. I didn't get much. It did bloom last year, but just barely. So we'll see what we get. And then tucked in on either side, just because I was throwing things in whatever places I could find, is some painted daisy, which is a type of, I'll put the name up on the screen, but it's the flower, it's the chrysanthemum that is used to make pyrethrin pesticide, which can be used organically. They're pretty, and so it'll be fun to have them regardless, but I like having them around just because in a pinch I can make a pesticide out of it if I need to. Somewhere deep in my notes I have that directions on how to do that. And then this bed is almost entirely herbs, but there are a few potatoes in here. I'm not growing, usually I grow 100 feet of potatoes. This year I'm not doing that. But I have one variety of potato called Smilin' Eyes that I have saved and grown from the previous year's potatoes for about 5 years, and they're very hard to find in terms of buying new seed potatoes, and so I didn't want to lose the variety, and so I did go ahead and put 4 Smilin' Eyes potatoes in here. They're similar to a Yukon Gold. They hold up quite well. They store well. It's a really good potato, and so I didn't want to lose track of that. So potatoes on the end here. And then everything else in here is herbs, mostly for my production growing, for my commercial kitchen. I've got parsley, marjoram, which is really starting to take off and get happy, which is fun. This is za'atar, which is kind of like like a wild oregano. It is a Middle Eastern plant, and it is used in the za'atar spice mix. A whole lot of poppy. So this is breadseed poppy, because I'm very low on that this year, and so I'm wanting to harvest quite a bit of it. And a little bit of dill, 3 or 4 dill plants in here. Right on the edge here, this is quinoa, which looks a lot, if you are familiar with lamb's quarter, it looks virtually identical to lamb's quarter, and it is the same genus, different species, as lamb's quarter, which is a really common weed that's also a very good edible. But I grew this out a couple of years ago and wanted to grow it again just to increase my seed supply. And so I've got quinoa in here as well. I'm going to need to probably stake that up a little bit. And then on the end, these are volunteers, but this is borage, which is really great for bees and also an edible flower. Reseeds like crazy. I have it all over the place. And then there is one additional poppy in there that was a volunteer from the poppies that I grew last year. You can take a look at last year's tour. Probably take a look at the one in June or July to see what those poppies look like. But I recognize the leaf structure on that, so that's going to be a poppy. And then this is California poppy that I have popping up, volunteering all over the place. And some of it is outside of the bed, and some of it is inside the bed. And I sometimes, especially when they're in corners, really struggle with pulling out volunteers. And so I just left that. And these guys, I'll show you a picture on the screen. These poppies, this batch here and the ones in the other bed were just absolutely glorious earlier today. They were all on fire and fully open and just so beautiful. So I just love having them. They bring me a lot of joy. So that's one bed. Okay, this bed is going to be kind of an overflow bed. I'm going to put some green beans in here. I need to get those planted. I might try to do that tomorrow. Half of this bed will be green beans. The other half will be onions. I'm not growing a lot of onions. I didn't get good germination on my onions. I wasn't planning on growing a lot anyway. And then the seed that I did plant just really struggled. So I've got some leeks. I might have a couple of scallions, but not much going in here. And then there's some more borage coming up. I've thinned this out. There was a lot more of it than this. This was spinach. I did do a very early season crop of spinach in here. There's one spinach plant still left right here that was wildly successful. I just randomly threw dirt in a 10 by 20 tray with a handful of spinach seeds on the 1st of February and threw it in my greenhouse. And I got very good germination. And then I planted it all out. Gosh, when did I do that? Maybe mid-April. So a while. It took a long time because it wasn't growing very fast because we had a pretty cold spring. But planted it all out in this bed and then a different bed as well. And I had the best spinach harvest that I've ever had this year. So maybe that's the secret, is just basically kind of winter sowing them and letting them do their own thing. In the corner of this bed, this is a dianthus that was left over from last year, and it is just really, really happy. They're perennial. It's kind of past its absolute peak, but look how lovely and fairy-like this particular dianthus is. So just so pretty. So I just left this in the corner. I planted it there last year and decided to just let it stay. And then coming up, you guys may remember that I've grown nigella for seed. It's actually a spice that's used in Indian cooking. I grew nigella in here. I had quite a bit of it volunteer last year, and then I've got random bits of it coming up here and there in this bed, which is where it was last year. This was a garlic bed last year. And so I'm just letting those ride because it would be nice to keep that going. I've still got quite a bit of seed from last year, but it doesn't hurt to have some more. And then along the edge here, this is celery. And this was a decision just today of like randomly deciding, I think I'm gonna throw the celery in here. So that's where that ended up. And then on the end of this, I've got trellised on both sides. These are cucumbers. So I've got 3 cucumbers here and 3 on the other side. And I will split them and send one up to the right, one up to the left, and one in the middle. And so we'll have cucumbers over this whole arch this year, which will be fun. This little guy, this is a wild leek from Pakistan, Afghanistan area that somebody gave me the seed for at a seed swap, and it evidently grows wild. They call it a wild leek. I'm not really sure. I haven't seen it bloom, but the leaves are flat the way a leek is flat, but I think it grows more like a chive. And I had some of it a couple of years ago, and I never did anything with it, and then it was in a bad spot, and it kind of got outcompeted by everything else that was going on. So I wanted to get some of this going again, and I still had a bunch of seed, and it came up immediately. Like it is, I think it's one of those things that's probably kind of like lawn onions or lawn garlic, where it just gets embedded into the environment and you're never without it, because the germination on it was crazy fast and very vigorous, and that was after it's about 3-year-old seed. But fun to have that going and actually try to do something with it. Tail end of this bed, I've got a little planter with Johnny Jump Ups that mostly were volunteers left over from last year, and then some Signet marigolds, which are little small yellow and orange edible marigolds that I just loved last year, and I sold some of them. I put them in as a edible flower, and so I'm going to probably do that again this year with the Johnny Jump Ups, the Signet marigolds, and the borage. More of this dianthus. It was a mixed color, and so there's some purple in here. There's also some purple over here. So I have it in 2 or 3 places left over from last year. Very fun. In this bed, this is my pepper bed this year. And so I have got 18 peppers in this bed. I like to give, people say you can plant peppers 12 inches apart. I don't think that's quite enough room. I think they need a little bit more than that. And so I decided to do 3 across instead of 4 across in this 4-foot bed. The first 6 here are Carmen, which is a sweet bullhorn style pepper that is my absolute favorite sweet eating pepper. I absolutely adore it, and so needed a bunch of those. I have a couple of Koreans, which is a fruity kind of mid-heat pepper, not super, super hot. And then guajillo, which is a fruity pepper that is used in Mexican cooking for things like chili powder, and shishito. So I have a couple of shishitos in here. If you're not familiar with shishitos, they're a Japanese variety that you pit green, fry up in a pan, and eat like an appetizer with some salt and sometimes a dipping sauce. They are fantastic. And so I have 2 of each of those, so they alternate. This is 2 shishitos, 2 guajillos, and then 2 of the Koreans. Here's our cucumber on this side as well. And then the other end of this bed, I have jalapenos, poblanos. Yeah, so 4 poblanos, 2 jalapenos. This bed probably gets the most sun of anything out here, so this should be a good pepper bed this year. I try to rotate my crops around so that I'm not getting the exact same thing in the exact same place. These poppies are volunteers. How glorious are they? And so this is a Shirley poppy. There are a lot of different kinds of poppies in the world. This one is Shirley poppy, very easy to reseed, also known as Flanders poppies, just stunningly gorgeous. And so I'm getting a lot of joy out of those right now. And then also tucked in around the edges of this bed, very long time ago, this area was a strawberry bed. This whole area was strawberries, and there's still a few hanging on. And they don't get a lot of water, and they get stepped on, and the dogs get them, and the bugs get them. So I'm not getting a ton of fruit off of these, but I've eaten a little small handful out here, so yeah, it doesn't hurt. A couple more peppers in this next bed up. I've got, this is Sugar Rush Peach, which is one of my favorite new hot sauce peppers. Really, really enjoy them. And then for other unusual, this is Aji Amarillo, which is a Peruvian style pepper that are also very good for hot sauce, a yellow pepper, and they just freeze beautifully as well. I like to freeze them, and then I end up using them in things during the winter. And then a couple of eggplants. So I have one of the little finger eggplant and one of the Rosa Bianca, and those are both varieties that I've been growing for the last 2 or 3 years, I guess. Here's the last spinach. This was spinach from, this bed was all spinach until I put the peppers in. And then this was spinach from last fall that didn't come up and then did germinate this spring. If you've ever seen this on your spinach, I've talked about this before, but this is leaf miner. And so if we pick this leaf and hold it up, I don't know if I've got enough light to do this, but if we hold that up to the light, you can see the larva in there climbing around. It's very hard to combat with pesticides because it's very hard to get contact with the worm because it's actually inside the leaf. And the key to this, if you want to avoid it, is to cover your plants with netting, a very fine netting. I believe the culprit of this, the adult, is a type of fly. And I covered both of my spinach beds all spring, and I had almost none of this. So it absolutely solves the problem, and I've lost entire crops of spinach in previous years to these guys. And so covering with a net makes all the difference. And that just was a volunteer from last fall, and so I didn't cover it because it was not in the bed that everything else was covered in. Here we've got 4 cabbages. This is brassica bed on this end. So 4 cabbages here, 2 broccolis, and then 3 kales. So 2 of these kales are a red Russian. Wilts pretty quickly once it's picked, but really fantastic flavor. This was lettuce from last fall that I planted way too late, and so I wasn't able to get it harvested. It was too small to harvest, and so it actually overwintered. It went all the way through the winter, and I've gotten some beautiful heads of lettuce out of this. And so when I planted the brassicas, I just tucked them in around the lettuce so that the lettuce could keep going. Those are about ready to come out. But 2 of these Russian kale. And then this was Supposed to be a lacinato kale, also called dinosaur kale, also called black kale. Has a lot of different names, but the seed source on this was calling this ragged jack. But this purple vein in here indicates that this is not exactly the same as the dino kale that I've grown in the past, but I'm perfectly happy to have it. So I've got that in there as well. And these have all been in the ground. I started them from seed kind of late March, I believe, and they've been in the ground here for probably 3 weeks at this point, and they're just starting to really do quite well. I love all the random volunteers I've got this year. It's just so fun. In this aisle, I also have a random lettuce and then another poppy that's coming up right here. This is my garlic bed, and so this was planted in October, and I have 3 or 4 different varieties of garlic in here. Most of it is softneck varieties, so I shouldn't get a lot in the way of garlic scapes in here. And then tucked in along the edge, this was celery. I had celery in here last year, and amazingly, even though I cut it completely to the ground, it is coming back. And what I'm expecting to happen is for this to send up a seed stalk. And that's fine. What I'm gonna do is it'll send up a seed stalk and I will save the celery seed, and then I actually sell a celery salt from my own homegrown celery seed. And so I'm letting those go to seed, but that was very unexpected. I did not expect celery to overwinter. We did have a pretty mild winter, and when we did get really cold, we had some snow cover, and so it helped insulate. And then this is thyme. And I did have 3 thyme plants in here. My chickens unfortunately got out and ran like crazy birds through here and dug up a lot of this garlic at one point, and I had to kind of replant and reestablish stuff. And 2 of the thyme plants that were in here were very small and not well established, and the chickens dug them up. But this one has survived, and it is like tripled in size in the last month and a half. So it's very, very happy. I love thyme. It is, that and rosemary are probably my 2 favorite herbs of all time. And so I always have some thyme going in various places around the garden. But this garlic bed seems to be doing fairly well. There's a little bit of yellowing in there. I did put a lot of worm castings down. I have a worm bin, and I cleaned out the whole worm bin and dumped it in here when I put this in. And so there's a lot of worm castings in there. I might go in and put a little extra fertilizer in there to deal with some of that yellowing. But they're hanging in there. They're doing pretty good. And this will come out first, second week in July. So we've got a little ways to go. Along the end of this bed, this is going to be another one of those cayenne echinaceas. So tiny little plant, but again, I was just desperately trying to get things out of my greenhouse and into the ground today. And I've got a rock there just so I don't forget and step on it accidentally. This is more of the Johnny Jump Up, and then buried in the middle here is a perennial salvia that was absolutely fabulous last year. In the spring, it bloomed like crazy, and then it got buried by everything else I had planted in this pot, and it didn't get a lot of sun, and so it's struggling a little bit this year, but that's okay. And then here's another one of those incredible dianthus. I'll put the name of this on the screen. It's been really, really pretty this year. And then all along here in the aisle, I have volunteers. So there's another little Johnny Jump Up. There's some chamomile coming up there. There are strawberries in there. There's more of the nigella, and then there's a whole lot more of the borage. So we have a lot of volunteers coming up in this aisle. We've had some pretty nicely timed rains. These aisles do not get water, but in the spring, if the rains are at the right time, they do quite well. And then this top bed, I have lettuce, and then very short-term brassicas. Look how gorgeous this lettuce was. And this was after the chickens dug it up. Like the day I planted it, right after I planted it, the chickens got in here. We've now solved that problem and put in way better fencing. But they dug up 3/4 of everything that I had planted, which was wildly frustrating. And so I had to just kind of unbury and salvage what I could and replant it. But it's done well. So there's a butterhead in here, which is probably my favorite type of lettuce to eat. And then the stuff on the end here is a type of romaine. And then we've got some purple loose leaf as well. Just gorgeous. And then along the front of this bed, these are garlic that are a hardneck garlic because I didn't have a lot of hardneck varieties left. And you can tell this is a hardneck because it's forming what's called a scape. And so hardneck garlics form scapes, and you can cut these off and throw them into a stir fry or pickle them or make a pesto out of them. But I don't have a lot of hardneck this year, and so I'll probably just throw them in a stir fry because I've only got 5 or 6. This was one head of garlic, and I actually don't know the variety. By the time I thought to put in a hardneck variety, all of the seed garlic locally was pretty much out. And so this was from a local farm that just had this in their store, and they didn't have it labeled. And so I just bought it blindly and decided to put it in the ground. At the end of this row, I've got a couple of bok choys that are going to seed because bok choy goes to seed in about 5 seconds. But the pollinators love these flowers, and you can tell this is in the mustard family because it has 4 petals, and so it's got the classic 4-petal flower happening there. And I have some other bok choy in my fridge right now, and so I just haven't bothered pulling this out. And then on the very end, this is a sprouting broccoli, which is a lot like a broccolini, and so there are 5 little sprouting broccolis in there that I'll get 3 or 4 harvests off of before I pull these plants out entirely. And then once the lettuce and the brassicas, the broccolis, are out, this bed is going to be carrots and beets. And so I'm going to do a late crop of carrots and beets in here. I find I get way better carrot germination when I plant later in the season when it's warm. I know you're supposed to be able to plant them early and they're frost tolerant, but in my experience, they often do not germinate well. And then tucked in on the end here, this is actual regular German chamomile. So this is the annual chamomile. And I mostly have it in here for the pollinators. Believe it or not, I'm not a huge fan of chamomile as a tea. I know a lot of people absolutely love it, but this one was a volunteer that was just in the aisle, and I dug it up and threw it in the corner of this bed because there was room. And then this was one that I actually did grow from seed. I have it tucked into a couple of different places, but it smells lovely and won't hurt anything to have it in there. And if it reseeds and I get volunteers next year, I'm not sad about it. And then here's the new garden bed. So this we just put in. And the bed is where it is partly because I could not bring myself to dig up this gorgeous red poppy, even though they really don't last that long. This will be completely done in another 2 weeks. But I couldn't bring myself to dig it out and move this bed over a foot. And so the bed is where it is partly because of that poppy, because sometimes nature just says, you need to just leave this here. But I have 8 tomatoes in this bed, which is a little tight. I like to give my heirloom tomatoes about 2.5 feet, and then I do not do a lot of pruning. I have a whole video on why I don't prune tomatoes in my climate, but 8 was about what I thought I could probably get in here. Again, these are 4x8 beds, or only 2 feet instead of 2.5 feet on the length. And so we'll just keep an eye on it. And I'm probably, instead of doing tomato cages this year, I normally have tomato cages and I have quite a few of them, but they're not gonna fit well in this bed. I'm probably gonna do what's called a Florida weave, where we're gonna put T-posts at the ends of the beds on both sides. So we'll have 4 T-posts in here, and then you take rope or twine and you just weave it back and forth through the tomatoes and tie it onto the T-posts, and you just keep going up as the plants get bigger and you hold them up that way. So I'm going to try that. I've never done it before. I've always wanted to try a Florida weave, and this might be the year for that in here. And then tucked in at the end, this is, it was saved from seed from a friend, and it's called cardinal basil. So it's a type of Thai basil, and I think it's all supposed to be this color, but it was saved seed, and so it's not all coming in that color. But I tucked a little basil in here on the end of this bed just because I had it and it was not happy being in a pot, and so I wanted to get out of the pot. But that'll be a good spot for that, and it smells absolutely glorious. Along with other things, I also have asparagus in this area. And so the asparagus is done for the season, but I have to work my beds around the asparagus because this was originally an asparagus bed before it was anything else. It was asparagus and strawberries, And then the gophers ate a lot of the asparagus, and then the strawberry bed kind of pittered out after time, and so we decided to put raised beds in here instead. So I have to work around where the asparagus is because that's obviously a perennial. Doing a pretty good job this year with the weeds and keeping the grass down, which is always a bit of a challenge in the spring, but we're getting there. And then this is an almond tree, and this almond tree is gonna shade this tomato bed in the afternoons, and I was a little worried about it, but now that I think about it, I actually think it's going to be a good thing because we really struggle with the heat here in the dead of summer and getting way too hot. And I've done shade on my tomatoes for the last couple of years because of that in order to get a better harvest. And so I'm kind of hoping that this almond, which this year actually has almonds on it, which is very exciting. I'm hoping that this almond tree is going to actually provide some afternoon shade for that tomato bed, and that I won't have to put shade cloth up because of that. So this is the perennial garden, and I'm just about to start giving away free tomatoes because I just have got way too many, and it's too late in the season, and I can't keep taking care of stuff into June that should have gone in the ground. So there's a lot of very large tomatoes in there.
Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.